everybody to the third meeting of the Artificial Intelligence Task Force. If everybody could please silence their phones. Really excited, got a great agenda today, but let's start with calling the roll.
Senator Nemes, Senator Rawlings, Senator Thomas, Senator Williams, Representative Bojanowski, Representative Lewis, Representative Miles, Representative Payne,
Here.
Co-Chair Mays Bledsoe, Chairman Bray.
Present. All right, having a quorum, we need to adopt some minutes. So I would be very pleased if someone would make a motion. All right, having a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. There we go. Any opposed? Awesome. All right, so I'm very excited for today's meeting. It is one of the things that it is probably the biggest conversation around artificial intelligence that we haven't got to touch yet. So today we're going to be focusing on energy policy and economic development. And first at the table to testify is Mr. John Bevington, who has a dearth of experience in both. So, Mr. Bevington, if you would please introduce yourself and introduce your guest, and then you all may proceed. Even better.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Bray and Chairwoman Bledsoe. My name is Caroline Clark. I'm Director of External Affairs for LG&E and KU. We appreciate you asking us to be here today to talk about this important subject that we know you are all hearing a lot about. And I would like to introduce John Bevington, PPL's Senior Director of Business and Economic Development, to do just that.
All right. Good morning. So I know some of you, for others that I don't know, I'll just give a brief experiential introduction of myself.
Hey,
so
John, can you make sure your microphone's on and pulled close?
There we go.
Perfect.
Is that better?
Thank you.
Okay. So I started my career in economic development in 2009. I worked for the Economic Development Cabinet from 2009 to 2018, where I was a project manager and ended up finalizing my term there as Commissioner of Business Development. So as you said, Mr. Chairman, I have been in economic development a long time. Compared with the tenure of some of the other utility folks that I work with now, I'm still a rookie in the utility industry, but I have gained a lot of experience in relation to how energy and economic development really meet up and that confluence of that environment. So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, I'll just give you a quick overview on LG&E and KU. I won't spend a lot of time on that. But then I want to talk about our economic development pipeline and what we're seeing today in terms of activity level. That will transition us into how that relates to AI and cloud data center and site selection process and the benefits of those. And then we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing at LG&E and KU to prepare to earn and enable these investments in the Commonwealth. Okay. So first of all, about LG&E and KU, we are Kentucky. We serve Kentucky and only Kentucky. We stretch everywhere from Bell and Harlan County all the way to Paducah and everywhere in between. It looks like a blob of slime on the map, the service territory boundaries, but you can see here where the red is, that's KU service territory. The green on the map is LG&E electric service territory. The blue is LG&E gas. And so, again, we're spread all over the state, and it's so important to us to serve our customer base. We also we're fully vertically integrated. So we own our distribution, transmission networks, and our generation. So we are fully integrated and regulated on all of those fronts. We serve over 1.3 million customers, and on the generation side, we own and can generate about 7.5 gigawatts of power, or 7,500 megawatts of power. And that'll be important as you hear some of the stats later on in the presentation, but that is our current generating capacity. So while we are obligated to serve our customer needs on the energy side of things, electric and gas, we also have a very important role in helping our communities with economic development. As you guys know, energy is one of the things that has always been a competitive advantage for Kentucky. We want to not only fulfill that, but expand upon that now and into the future. And so my team is listed here. We have been honored to be selected as a top utility in the nation for economic development 9 out of the last 11 years by Site Selection Magazine. In 2024, we supported 76 projects in Kentucky that relate to about $3 billion of announced investment and about 3,000 new jobs across our communities that we serve. In relation to overall percentage, I kind of like to track how we're punching in our weight class. So of those announcements, about 45% of total statewide investment announcements were in our service territories, which accounted for about 40% of the total investment announced and about 34% of the total jobs announced. So now I want to talk a little bit about our project pipeline. I'll go into some detail related to that pie chart there. But in my experience in the last 16 years I've been doing this, I've not ever seen as much interest in Kentucky as we have now, not only from data centers, but from the manufacturing sector. We've got tons of public benefit projects, schools and hospitals being built, a lot of that in our service territory. And so the pie there represents about 8.5 gigawatts of interest in our service territory. So going back to what I said earlier, today we own and can generate about 7,500 megawatts or 7.5 gigawatts. The total pipeline of interest and the requests for energy relate to about 8.5 gigawatts, so more than what we can generate today. Now, we don't expect all of that to happen in our service territories, right? We're only going to get a fraction of that. It's just a numbers game, right? But the point is, it is significant, particularly on the energy side of things, right? And data centers relate to about 2/3 of that 8.5 gigawatts in our total pipeline, all right? So walking through the individual pieces of the pie, the blue piece that you see there is early stage. We've received a phone call from somebody. They're interested in talking about Kentucky or doing business here. We give that about a 10% probability of success. Now, it can move through the process and get higher level of probability as we work with them more, but these are just initial inquiries. Those initial inquiries account for about 2,000 megawatts of total power request. So again, very, very significant. The green is kind of the next step up, so we give that kind of a 20% probability. That relates to almost 3,000 megawatts. So 2,000 megawatts in just the inquiry stage, 3,000 megawatts in the stage just above that. We're starting to work with those projects a little bit more. The red are very active projects that we're working on right now, having daily or weekly conversations. We're getting into information exchange on those projects that are in the red. That represents 43 projects and about 3,000 megawatts of interest. We give those the chances for success there about 50% chance. So again, they're just more active than the previous two that we talked about. And then I'll combine the last two together. Those are what we call imminent and announced projects. So projects that have already made public statements or signed contracts with us for electric service, or those that are about 80% ready to announce. Those two together represent 68 projects and about 575 megawatts of total power. One power generation station, just as an example, is about 630 megawatts. And so between our imminent and announced projects, it's almost the size of a new power plant, just to give you some scale and representation there. Breaking it down a little bit further in the project pipeline, so I'll do kind of 3 different categories. Again, we're working on about 170 projects, 8.5 gigawatts of power request. The first category that we'll look at here is kind of new and existing customer expansions. So we're working on 88 projects in that realm now that represent about 450 megawatts. And again, these are existing companies in Kentucky that either want to build a new location or expand, not somebody who's coming in new, fresh, right? Of those 88 projects, 24 have already been announced. They include things like Toyota's recent announcement to build a new paint line in Georgetown, almost $1 billion investment there. North American Stainless is undertaking a new mill expansion. That's a pretty big load, about 20 megawatts. The University of Kentucky in the healthcare industry is building new hospitals and expanding hospitals. And you guys have seen plenty in the news about GE Appliances and their initiative to bring a new washing machine line to Louisville. So that's the new and expanding industry component of it. For new economic development projects, these are companies that don't locate or exist here already but are considering it. There's 57 projects in that pipeline worth 2.4 gigawatts of additional power requests. So a significant amount of interest from outside of Kentucky. The industries that those represent include automotive industry, suppliers, distilleries, packaging, plastics, and things of that nature. And then the final piece, and this is what we'll transition into the data center and AI component of the opportunity pipeline. We're working on 20 data center projects right now. And those 20 data center projects have 5.6 gigawatts of potential request for us just in our service territory. That doesn't include anything going on elsewhere in the state. Much of that is attributed to your all's passage of the sales tax exemption bill in 2024, which was expanded this past legislative session. So appreciate that. Of those 20 projects that we're working on, one in Louisville, which is the Poe Development Company and Powerhouse Data Centers, has announced their initiative to build a 400 megawatt data center in Louisville, which is now actually, they're thinking about expanding that to 525 megawatts. So that will be a massive investment. To give you an order of magnitude on what an investment like that looks like, I've read recently that for each megawatt of computing power, it takes about $10 million of investment to build a data center. So for a 400 megawatt data center, you're talking about a $4 billion investment in the state. That $4 billion is going to be taxed in real property and tangible property. The sales tax, obviously, through the exemption is not going to be there, but our schools and local communities and state can benefit greatly from a $4 billion investment like that.
Yeah, do you care to repeat that?
Absolutely, and I'm a talker, so please, at any point in time, feel free to ask. So it's about a $10 million investment for every megawatt of computing power. So a 400 megawatt project represents a $4 billion potential investment. And that can vary. That's just a benchmark based on some research that I've seen online. Does that answer your question? Yes, it does. Okay, perfect. So many of you may be reading in the news or hearing from local communities about sort of where are data centers trying to locate? What is their process? And so I want to walk you through a little bit of what's the traditional economic development process and how does the data center process differ from that a little bit. I think it's a really important thing as you're talking to your constituents and so forth to try to understand this. So the typical economic development process is a process of elimination. What you'll have is a manufacturer, let's just say it's a European manufacturer that wants to open up their first U.S. manufacturing facility. What they'll do is look at a multi-state region and a multi-community region, and they'll say, okay, I'm looking for 100 acres. I need X amount of workforce. I want to be so close to an interstate or a rail line. I want to make sure that I have the right kind of utility access, and they will put those communities against each other and try to eliminate, right? They're trying to get from hundreds of communities down to probably 20. When they get to that 20, they will then go to the communities and they will visit and they'll understand what's going on in the local community. Is this a place we think our business can be successful? They will then take that 20 and drop it down to 4 or 5 communities. Then they'll negotiate incentives. They'll try to finalize their workforce plans and so forth, make their announcement, and start constructing their facility. The data center process is very different in that it's not a process of elimination, it's a process of evaluation. Data centers have to be located, if it's a large data center, now we serve some in Kentucky that are smaller that can be served off of our distribution system, but if it's a larger data center, they have to locate near the transmission system. The transmission system, as you guys are probably aware, is kind of the interstate of the electrical grid. It can carry the most electrons. And so for major data centers, they have to locate near a transmission line. Otherwise, timelines to construct and regulatory process of approval and things like that become so difficult that the timeframes just don't work out for them. So that is a very, very important factor. So they come to us first and they say, how much capacity is on that line? Can it carry more electrons than it can today if we locate our project there? We will then study those lines, give them initial feedback on the reality of a data center locating near that transmission line, or what projects do we have to undertake in order to make that work. We'll give them that feedback, and then they will have to go through more formal processes if they want to proceed. There is some misconception out there that if a data center locates somewhere in a community, it's going to harm every other customer from an energy perspective. That is unequivocally false, right? There is no way we can operate and bring a new customer online if it negatively affects everybody else's service. So we have to go through formal studies that are regulated by FERC and so forth to make sure that that can't happen. That's about a 6 or 9 month process in and of itself, that formal process. So while that's going on, we will invest in infrastructure for them. We'll order long lead time equipment. Some of you may have heard that transformer lead times are sometimes 3, 4, 5 years now. So to get ahead of the game, we will go and order equipment for them. But we will require that they secure that investment such that if the project doesn't happen, they will reimburse us for any investments made, and that way other customers aren't harmed. So it's a very responsible way of looking at things to make sure that other customers aren't going to be harmed by their due diligence process. So again, then we'll procure long lead investments. They'll perform due diligence on the site. In some cases, they'll have to, go through zoning processes and so forth, because again, think about the transmission line is the asset that is most valuable to their process. Did you have a question? No. Okay, I thought I saw you raise your hand. And then once all that's done, and that's probably a year or year and a half long process of evaluation, that's when you'll start seeing an announcement made, some formal discussions and things of that nature. So the challenge and opportunity here, this is a visual from a Deloitte study that was done earlier this year just on the opportunity and challenge of data centers in the United States today. And what I'm talking about is specifically to LG&E and KU, but energy nationwide to help AI data centers, to help our national security to get ahead is going to be a problem nationwide. Every state, every utility is trying to solve for it, just like we are. So I thought that this was a really interesting visual of the top challenges amongst respondents for data center infrastructure development. And they asked data centers and they asked utility executives to weigh in on this. Both data centers and utilities agree that the number one challenge for siting data centers in the United States is power and grid capacity constraints and meeting load growth. In other words, if we don't have it, they won't come, right? The second thing that I think is really important that I want to make sure and communicate to you all this morning is the piece in the gray. So data centers, number two concern is data center and grid build out timeline mismatches. In other words, a data center can build a facility in 2 years, year and a half, 3 years, somewhere in that time frame. A utility to build a new power plant, it takes 5, sometimes 6 years to build that. You've got to go through the regulatory approval process like we would have to do with the Public Service Commission. That's almost a year-long process. We've got to secure the power generation equipment. So there are probably 4 suppliers worldwide that make this power generation equipment, and everybody's coming to them asking for, new equipment, right? So you got to get in line for that, and that has to be built, and that takes time. So again, and then you got environmental permitting and other things. So when you stack all that up, it takes us 5 years for something that they can build in 2 years. So we have to start thinking ahead and things, and that's really where we are today in Kentucky, and I'll talk about that in a couple slides from now. Additional data center opportunities from the economic development perspective. So I was talking a little bit about some stats pertaining to a singular project, right? Think about a $4 billion investment in just one hyperscale size data center. According to a 2023 Data Center Coalition report, which was commissioned with PwC, and you're going to see stats in here that say from 2017 to 2021, this is not even accounting for the current boom in economic development and data centers that we're currently experiencing. This is just stats between 2017 and 2021. Each data center job accounts for 6 jobs elsewhere in the economy. You all may have seen a similar stat for manufacturing projects, and manufacturing projects have exactly the same number of jobs, indirect and induced jobs, as data center jobs do, right? So 6 additional jobs for every 1 job of a data center. Total contribution to the U.S. GDP between 2017 and 21 grew 37% in that time to $486 billion. Data centers have been characterized as not having many jobs, right? A lot of people will say, well, they don't have many jobs. Labor income earned directly from the data center industry grew by 74% between 2017 and 2021, from $43 billion to $75 billion. So while the job numbers relative to the investment amount, if you think about the Blue Oval project, which was announced to be a $5.8 billion capital investment and like 5,000 jobs, right? A $4 billion investment might create several hundred permanent jobs, but it will also bring along with it thousands of construction jobs that are in place for years over the time of development on a particular site. And the final piece is, I'm a pretty competitive person. We compete with Ohio a lot on things. And so this one particularly rang true with me. Ohio's data center industry directly and indirectly generated $2.6 billion in state and local tax revenues from 2017 to 2021. Now, the enabler for data center interest is the sales tax exemption bill that you all have passed. Once that was passed, the floodgates open, and now everyone's looking at Kentucky in a very different way than we were before, right? Again, if you think about the development timeline that I talked about earlier, it takes time to secure some of these investments, but the interest is extremely high based on that pie chart that I showed you earlier. So what are we doing at LG&E and KU to meet these demands? We are investing in our transmission infrastructure. We're investing in reliability investments throughout our system. In 2022, we asked for approval of a CPCN, Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, from the Public Service Commission to build a 120 megawatt solar facility in Mercer County, which is underway today. We're also going to purchase a 120 megawatt solar facility in Marion County that's being built by a developer, and we will purchase that from them. And we've also broken ground or are underway in construction of a 645 megawatt natural gas combined cycle unit at Mill Creek in Louisville, Kentucky. That was all done in 2022 before the sales tax exemption bill was passed and before all of this new activity came online. So we are currently in front of the Public Service Commission asking for approval of a CPCN for some additional units. We've also reached a stipulation agreement with most of the intervening parties in that case, and here are some stats about that stipulation agreement. If approved, we would build Brown 12, which is a natural gas combined cycle unit in Mercer County, another 645 megawatt natural gas unit. We would also build Mill Creek 6 in Louisville, available in 2031, another 645 megawatt natural gas combined cycle unit. We would install an SCR, which is an environmental control on our Gent unit to make it more environmentally, compliant, so we can continue to run that unit for the long term. And we would also extend the operation of a coal unit at Mill Creek 2 in order to continue to have short-term capacity to encourage this data center business to come online. So our obligation is clear. Our enablement is clear. We have to supply power in order to allow these investments to come to the state and to reap the benefits of the taxes and the increased jobs as a result. So that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm sorry if I went a little too fast, but I'm glad to go back over anything that you guys might have.
No, thank you. That was perfect. That was great. Do we have any questions from members? Senator Rawlings.
Yeah, just curious, when you mentioned the 20 data center projects, is that how do surrounding states compare and nationally, and how's that determined? Is it determined based on population or growth of business and industry?
Yeah, the 20 is really based on the interest in Kentucky right now. And again, I go back to the enabler, which is that sales tax exemption piece. Mm-hmm. So when that was passed, now companies start calling us. They start calling other utilities. They start calling the Economic Development Cabinet to evaluate where they might invest in the state. I don't have a comparison between Kentucky and other places, but I can tell you that when you look at the stats for Ohio and their tax revenue benefits, they've been in the game a long time. I think their sales tax exemption bill was passed probably 2010-ish, 2013-ish, something like that. So they've been in it for 10, 12 years. Mm-hmm. We're just really scratching the surface. What you're seeing, I think, is a lot of density in other areas that have had that sales tax exemption for a long time. Mm-hmm. And that density creates a diversification opportunity where they can now look at places like Kentucky to evaluate opening these here.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Senator Thomas.
Thank you. Outstanding presentation, John.
Thank you.
So I want to be clear in terms of my thinking going forward. data centers don't have a uniform capacity. In other words, you can build a data center that has a 400 megawatt capacity. You can build a data center that has a 200 megawatt capacity. You can build a data center that has a 600 megawatt capacity. Am I correct on that?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. All right. You make a point about the value of the sales tax exemption and how it's been beneficial to you. I just finished attending 2 legislative conferences in the last 3 weeks. I've been traveling a lot. And what I hear a lot, I've been going to several AI meetings at those conferences. What I've been hearing a lot is the need for regulatory reform and ease in regulation to allow these data centers to come online. You suggested that, and I take it that you feel that you want Kentucky to have a regulatory environment that would spur the creation of data centers, obviously spur the creation of economic development. Am I hearing that from you?
Well, if I may, just one thing, Senator Thomas, that I heard you say is that it benefits me or us. I actually think it benefits the state and the communities in the school system, right? I mean, we are just a part of the process that helps enable these things to occur. I think that we have a chance. Like, if you think about a $4 billion facility, just back of the napkin math, if there's 1% on the real estate there and a 1.5% on the tangible property there, you're talking about potentially $40 or $50 million a year to our local economy, to our state economy, to our schools. And I certainly don't want to opine. You guys have a very important job to do on the regulatory environment and those kinds of things. So I certainly don't want to opine on what I think you should do. But from an simply from an economic development perspective, I think it is the most opportune situation that we have in front of us right now. We are really at the precipice of being able to earn some of this. I don't think Kentucky's going to own the data center market. I mean, Loudoun County, Virginia has been, they've been in a mature state on data centers for many, many years. I just think we ought to get our fair share. These things are going to get built someplace. I don't think there's any question as a result of, the creation of this task force, we know that AI is going to continue to become a bigger part of all of our lives on a year-over-year basis. I think all of us are going to continue to use cloud computing and things like that. So, the service that we all require is going to mean that these have to get built someplace. And if we give them an open door here in Kentucky, I think they will come here.
Representative Payne.
Thank you for your presentation today. So I was looking when you said, we have 20 proposed or potential data center projects, one of which has been publicly announced, and you said that was going to require 525 megawatts. When I saw on the energy production side of things, like your solar fields that you were talking about, they're producing, you said both of those, 120 megawatts. So if my math is correct, that's almost 4.5 of those solar fields for one data center project. So to me, that's kind of concerning when we have a potential of 20. So what are other forms of energy, and how can we increase production more reliably to meet those demands?
Yeah, I think really importantly, so at LG&E and KU, we've got an all-of-the-above approach. We really are trying to incorporate every cost-effective means to create energy for our communities as we can. So the solar pieces are part of that. We're also building a battery. I didn't mention that. We're building a battery in Mercer County as well. That battery can store some of that solar energy and deploy it in peak time needs. But I think the biggest thing, to your question, is the construction of these natural gas combined cycle units. They happen to be the most efficient and cleanest form of baseload generation that we can deploy currently today. So we've got a 645 one underway now. If approved by the Public Service Commission in our current CPCN case, we would build 1,300 megawatts more of natural gas combined cycle plants as a result of all of this activity. And of course, if the interest continues, we're not precluded from going back to the commission at later times and asking for even more if we need to. So for right now, we're trying to take our probabilities of success with the project pipeline that we've got, factor that into kind of a load forecast, which is what we did in our integrated resource planning process, and then go to them and ask for approval of these new units.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask another question?
Senator Thomas.
Yeah. Thank you. John, does it matter where you build these centers? I mean, I've actually been in Loudoun County. I go to D.C. regularly, so I've seen. I mean, Loudoun County is a very wealthy county now. Does it matter? Does it matter where? I mean, could these be built near Lexington or Louisville? Are they better built in more rural communities? Answer that question for me.
Yeah, sure. The most important thing, Senator Thomas, is the transmission system. They can be built anywhere as long as there is nearby transmission, the nearby transmission grid and capacity on that transmission grid. I think those are the most important aspects of a data center location decision. Now, depending on who the data center operator is, they might want to be closer to a particular kind of workforce, right? They might have a particular workforce need where they want to be close to a density of, universities and so forth. They will require a lot of construction and construction traffic. So typically they don't want to be so off the beaten path that they overwhelm local roads and things like that with all of the construction equipment and things like that that they've got to have. But generally speaking, again, the capacity of the transmission system and nearby transmission lines is really the most important thing.
Senator Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting. Capacity of transmission lines, I'm going to answer. Capacity of data lines also is key because these data centers are not just for Kentucky, they're for all over the world. And Loudoun, you might say, is saturated. They're looking to move their data center backup centers somewhere else. And the fact that we are in an area with, even though we have these tornadoes and these floods and we look at it, we have airports here because we don't have hurricanes, we don't have blizzards. We are a great area to have a facility that has less natural disasters than everywhere. So that's my response and why they should be looking here. So what is I've got two leading questions and then a follow-on question. What is your generating, I'm going to call reserve generating capacity right now that you could, if somebody built a plant, you could deliver? What in your largest transmission line, since that's part of that, your interstate transmission line, what is the reserve capacity that you have on that, your transmission lines on that? And that's my leading question to some of these big companies are actually investing in a power center so they can put their data center right next to a generating plant or right next to where they run transmission. So do we have the regulatory structure in Kentucky that allows you to have excess generating capacity, excess transmission capacity, and for a company to come in to directly invest into a facility on that? So that's, you can choose how or which of those you want to answer.
Well, those are great questions. I appreciate those very much. I will do my best. I am not a power generation expert by any means. I'm not an engineer. I'm an economic development guy who tries to put things in layman's terms for clients. So I'll try to do that in answering your question. As it pertains to generation capacity, as a result of our IRP and the current CPCN, we have as a utility a requirement to keep enough spinning reserve for reliability of the system, right? So we have to have a certain amount of reserve capacity to satisfy that requirement in and of itself. But beyond that reserve requirement, we have noted a need based on all of this economic development activity such that we've applied for that CPCN to ask for more generation capacity to come online. If that capacity is approved by the Public Service Commission in this case, we will have the ability to secure data center operations in Kentucky, and we will have enough generation to do so, at least in the near term, right? As I said earlier, we can always go back to the Public Service Commission and ask for more if we see the need for more. As our forecasts indicate right now, we need that new generation to secure the investments.
So you don't have it right now. You need
Correct.
permission.
Correct. On the transmission system, you asked what is the largest line in our transmission network. We do have a small amount of 500 kV that's down in kind of the southeastern Kentucky, southwest Virginia market. But typically 345 kV is our most robust system in the state of Kentucky. So data centers really want to locate as near to that as they can. Secondarily, we have 161 and 138 kV, which can also be beneficial for, let's call it a mid-size hyperscale data center. Probably can't get to a gigawatt data center with those lines, but probably something like a 300 or 400 megawatt data center would satisfy that. As it pertains to the regulatory environment here, I'm just going to speak from my perspective. If you look at the news, there are capacity constraints all over the country, and particularly in markets like PJM and MISO. You can read the reports. I don't have to tell you about that, right? Those are markets in which the economics generate the need for independent power providers to build generation. So it's an economic picture. Here in Kentucky, our regulatory environment, we're obligated to serve our customer needs. And I would rather be in a position of selling from an obligation perspective, knowing that the generation will show up if the customers are going to be there, than in a market where you're subject to questions about whether or not generation is going to get built based on some economic picture.
Do we have a regulatory climate that if Microsoft comes in and says, hey, we'd like to build half your plant, that they could invest? I know you're a private corporation, but we have other non-investment public. But do we have a regulatory environment that would would enable a user to come in and invest in that facility like we've done?
Again, I'm not an attorney, and I don't claim to know all of the laws and regulations, but as I understand it, I don't know if you want to weigh in on this at all, Caroline, you have to be certified as a regulated utility in Kentucky in order to generate power and sell it here.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and maybe we can get back to you too. We can go back and talk to our team, but I think as of right now, I don't know that is something where they could actually own half of the plant.
Okay.
Now,
Thank
in
you.
some markets, like I talked about earlier, like if you think about a PJM market, in some cases, those data centers are thinking about partnering on generation builds there because someone else isn't doing it.
Yeah.
Whereas here, we have the obligation to do it, and therefore they don't necessarily have a need to have to get in.
And maybe they don't own the plant, but they commit to buying on
Correct.
a long-term basis half the power coming
Correct.
out of that.
Right.
Right. Okay.
right.
When you're looking at these excess capacities, do you factor that in? Do you make them give commitments to that power that are contractual commitments?
Yeah, we currently, in a case at the public... Are we good? Okay. We're currently in front of the Public Service Commission on a separate case, and in that case, we have proposed a high load factor tariff, which would require data centers sign a 15-year commitment and have certain minimum demands that they pay for if they're going to operate on our system. And that's a protectionist contract that would make sure that all other customers aren't burdened with, stranded investments and so forth. Yep.
Senator Nemus.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I won't get into a conversation. You said something about a lot of traffic during construction. What about after construction? As you alluded to, there's not as many employees like, say, with a Ford plant or something.
Correct, yeah. I mean, that's, again, one of the benefits, to your point, is a high level of tax increases as a result of these and not a high level of need of increased services. To your point, I mean, after they're constructed fully, you have a smaller number of employment and less constraints on roads and so forth.
Just if I weigh in, it just means that the tax revenues coming into the counties don't necessarily have to go to building new roads or new schools. They can go into the existing infrastructure.
All right. Thank you all for your presentation. That was excellent. Exactly what I was hoping to kind of dive into and look at. I think to Senator Williams' point, regulatory reform, I think this is a ripe area at this point in time that we may need to look at as a legislature, because we're seeing a massive amount of interest in Kentucky, not just in data centers. I know through the Artificial Intelligence Task Force, we're tasked with looking at data centers and all of that. But we're seeing some RFPs come into the state that have astronomical energy uses in manufacturing sector. We need to make sure that we've got the generative capacity in Kentucky in case one of these land, so that we can be competitive with other states that have existing programs. So I do feel like that this is something that we need to take a long, hard look at, and really do appreciate your presentation.
Pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you. May I say one thing? And
Yes,
that would
please.
just be when we talk about regulatory reform. I would add that I think that the current regulatory model in Kentucky is one of the benefits that we have that has helped keep our rates low and competitive for 30, for 50 some years. So I think there are benefits to our regulatory model that are what are drawing a lot of our economic development here.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, thank you all.
Thanks.
Up next, we've got a group. I don't know how you all want to come up. Extremely excited to see what they're going to present on. Been meeting with them for a few months. Extremely excited about what I believe is getting ready to happen in Kentucky. They just had an announcement, I know, in Paducah. So if you will please just introduce yourself, and then you can proceed with your testimony. Make sure your microphone is on and pulled really close.
Yep. Can you guys hear me? Awesome. Cool. Well, it's an honor to be here and appreciate, the invite. My name is Sean Liu. I'm a partner at Founders Fund, a Silicon Valley-based venture capital firm with more than $40 billion of asset under management. We've backed some of the most legendary companies over the last 2 decades in technology, including SpaceX, Airbnb, Stripe, Google DeepMind that invented AI, so OpenAI. So a lot of activity there that we see at the forefront of, manufacturing, technology, and defense. And my own background was mostly in manufacturing and venture capital, over a decade investing, plus half a decade operating in a chemical company in Houston where I was a CFO. At Founders Fund, I spent most of my time covering AI infrastructure, manufacturing, frontier technology, and energy. So this is, the AI wave is pretty central to our core thesis going forward to ensure the competitiveness of America. And a lot of what I will be covering today is more macro focus, what we're excited about, what we're seeing in AI, and what many of the firms that we backed want from AI infrastructure perspective. Very transparently, AI is energy. And I don't think I'm saying anything new. John has highlighted the U.S. generation capacity has peaked for greater than 20 years. We have not made net new investments in new generation to really increase our competitiveness vis-a-vis China over the last 20 years. And we see we're lagging in the ability to bring on new power. Interconnection queue is really blocking our ability to actually add new capacity onto the grid. And this is not just a state by state problem. This is uniform across all RTOs and ISOs across the U.S. And a lot of that is a mix shift away from firm-based gas and coal power into renewables. On the flip side of this, we have reindustrialization and AI. We see from many of the forecasts we've seen from our companies, Goldman Sachs and others, that the data center power demand over the next decade or so will probably surge by more than 3 to 4x. And on top of that, as Rep. Bray has highlighted, there's also reindustrialization efforts happening in the U.S. that's competing for that power. So net on net, we probably see a large, in aggregate, again, in the U.S., supply and demand mismatch that will probably occur this year or next, where we will see a lot higher demand for firm power than generation capacity and support. And we don't see this as being largely sustainable for, again, the future competitiveness of the U.S. efforts in AI. And if we look at where AI is from a capital cycle perspective, we're actually still in its early innings, and we're already seeing very large investment dollars coming through. if we look at past, we call the Industrial Revolution, AI is as equivalent to Industrial Revolution. We spent roughly 6% of our GDP on railroad buildouts in the 1880s, and then in the telecom roughly 1%. And this is rough estimates, but AI data centers is just 1.2%, and we think AI will have probably even a bigger impact than the internet. So somewhere, we're still quite a few percentage points away, and this is just from a capital deployment side, massive. And this year, we're probably going to see AI data center investments eclipse office investments, and we think these AI factories, as Jensen calls them, will probably be the next phase of build out. The new data centers would be the new offices from both jobs and from both jobs and investment perspective. And so where are they being built? From the conversation that we've had with our portfolio companies and others who are investing in this, it's really a battle for energy, talent, and support. From the energy side, you see that the traditional hubs for data centers are relatively grid capacity constrained. That said, we're seeing a number of new emerging markets, particularly in the panhandles of Texas, that are emerging as new centers for these hyperscaler data centers. And we're seeing these, largely the Googles and Metas of the world being experimental with where they want to be. As John mentioned, they want power, but that's not the only thing, right? So they want talent, they want other things, and they also want access to very strong fiber and a local workforce that can actually maintain these servers. So it's not just, hey, we built something and we're here. We want a whole workforce that can actually support these gigawatt scale data centers. And similarly, the battle for talent is strong. Today, you see a lot more in the news, where we're paying hundreds of millions of dollars for these AI researchers. We feel like that's just the first innings of this game. But the long-term battle is really over one that's in the physical world, right? When you see the largest investments from these hyperscalers, over $350 billion of CapEx is really in atoms, not actually in these AI researchers. And over the long term, it's over electricity, HVAC, steel, and water. And we think we are a big investor in Crusoe, and they're building the first Abilene data center for OpenAI that's over 1 gigawatt. The greatest stress they feel today is really on the labor force and the availability of supply chain and the speed with which power can come online. Lastly, it's support. From a state perspective, we see a lot of different states rolling out new regulations or deregulations, for that matter, to speed up approval for power, to provide energy subsidies, and to support workforce training programs. And again, this is not just concentrated in construction's workforce, but also in post-construction support, amongst other things. Senator Thomas, you have a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Senator Thomas.
I want to go back to the slide regarding energy first, and then I want to go back to the slide regarding right. Okay. Obviously, my heart's in Kentucky. As I look at your map, I don't see Kentucky identified anywhere on that map. And again, going back to what I heard over the last few weeks about the regulatory environment, I want you to tell me, to the best that you can, why I don't see Kentucky listed. I see Indianapolis, I see Chicago. I can't think if that's Huntsville or Memphis. But I don't see Kentucky anywhere. Why is that?
I think the biggest game in town for energy today is really speed to power, right? And many of the first mega scale data centers being built are in areas where there is existing power. So you see the gray dots for secondary markets. Indianapolis, Memphis have some existing infrastructure for data center build out. So I wouldn't say that, it precludes Kentucky from participating, but amongst the emerging markets, especially the panhandles of Texas, Los Angeles, Minnesota, we do see large transparently stranded renewable projects that are already on the grid, have interconnection queues, and people are tapping into it. So the opportunities, again, as I highlighted before, we're still in the first innings of this AI infrastructure build out. So the long game is really who can actually get energy on, firm base loads onto the grid to support these data centers for the future. And if you see the forecast, we're still probably only halfway through the initial phase of this build out.
Then go to your second slide on talent. Kentucky's not the worst, but we're certainly not solid green or dark green. Again, what's it going to take for us to get there?
It's an interesting question, right? So we do think a lot about what does a workforce training program looks like for electricians, for HVAC, workers, and I think it really comes down to the education system pumping out and vocational schools, and we've seen Crusoe and others partner with local universities and community colleges to actually bring on hands-on talent. These are not like theoretical people, right? Like you do actually need to know how to fix a generator, how to build these things. So I think it starts from the ground up. How do you have better vocational training and have the availability of the workforce to tap? I mean, to be very fair, for the Abilene data center, Crusoe has 5,000 workers on site. It almost doubled the town's workforce overnight. And a lot of them will probably stay in that area because you start to see this network effect of know-how that resides within a particular region, and people just aggregate there. And you do see, in the traditional data center hubs of Illinois and Ohio, there are more available talent. But I think, at the end of the day, it's a talent acquisition program, it's a talent training program. And I think, with the right set of partners, public-private partnerships, I think you'd be able to, build a workforce that's quick enough and attractive enough for people to come. Transparently, Abilene didn't have a workforce, right? Crusoe brought them there, but I feel like they're really starting to grow that workforce pretty aggressively.
Did you finish your presentation before I open it up to more questions?
I was just going to do one last thing. It's a case study on Abilene, Texas. Again, this is very high level, and is meant to kind of stir a conversation, which is there are tax abatements to companies that are building there across both sales as well as property, and I think it's important to highlight the grid resilience component of this, right? ERCOT. It doesn't quite sit with just one utility. It is very much the RTOs that are also stepping up to provide the firmness of and the guarantee for grid reliability for something like an AI data center. And these things are 15, 20-year leases, so you are protected on the downside. And at the same time, the flip side of that is also true. We want to make sure that the infrastructure is actually available to support a 15-year, 20-year commitment.
Fantastic presentation. Senator Williams.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good presentation. So you were mentioning renewables back there in energy, and that they're looking at energy. That's the number one thing. We have a lot of baseload power here. How important is renewables to these investors or to these companies that are coming here? Are they looking for good baseload power, or are they insisting upon a mix of renewables? And I might go to the last presentation. Does having that little 120 megawatt solar plant help attract because they're looking for renewables, or would we be better off with spending the same amount of money for a coal plant because they just want power and they don't care?
Oh man, it's a good question, Senator Williams. I'll say this. I think you what they're solving for is speed to power, and there is also I will not dismiss the importance of renewables to these hyperscalers. It is part of their mandate. They do care a lot about it, and they're thinking about 15, 20 years in the future how to build a more sustainable mix of power. And I think many of them are also investing very heavily in new technology on battery and other forms of next generation solar and nuclear, for example, to build these firm capacities. But in the near term, they are probably okay with having, if you can get power online in 1 to 2 years, it's probably okay for them to have, combined cycle gas or coal as a near term bridge. But I would say, like, from all the conversations that we've heard, it is important for them to have a long-term path towards mostly renewables mix for their data center.
Right. And they consider nuclear part of that
Yes,
renewable?
very much so.
Okay. Thank you.
If anything, I actually feel like they when they think about, again, these are like 20, 30, 20-year assets plus, timeline for nuclear is a little bit longer, but from a firmness and availability perspective, it's also the lowest cost of, on an LCOE basis over the long term.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up on that remark. So they are okay with coal as a baseload now, thinking that 20 or 30 years from now they'll replace it with nuclear, perhaps, and that they really don't need solar or wind at this point.
I think, just being very transparent with you, I think coal is a struggle. Gas is probably a lot better. Most of the conversation we've seen have preferred gas as a bridge versus coal. And, they do want to transition to renewables, a mix of solar, nuclear, wind, and, next generation combined cycle gas, in like a 5 to 10 year time frame.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your presentation. It was great. It kind of, Senator Williams' question leads us directly into the next presentation. We've got with us today Scott Nolan, CEO and founder of General Matter, who just had a awesome event out in Paducah, and he's going to be here to tell us what's going on in Kentucky with General Matter. So thank you so much. If you'll just introduce yourself for the record, and then you can begin your testimony.
Yes, Scott Nolan, CEO of General Matter. Thank you for having me here today. Excited to testify about this topic. I think the first two talks really led us into the importance of energy, and then the last talk really talked about that transition into nuclear and its role in AI and AI data centers. So, our company's motto is fueling American power, but today we're talking about fueling American intelligence. Some context on what we do. We are a uranium enrichment company, so we are trying to restore the U.S. leadership in uranium enrichment. This enrichment makes nuclear fuel. That fuel powers reactors that can power the grid and enable AI leadership in the U.S. And the U.S. used to be the world leader in enrichment. Today we do less than 1% of worldwide enrichment. So 90% all the way down to less than 1%. We're trying to get the U.S. back to capability through commercial leadership. So last week in Paducah, we announced our first site. This announcement was regarding a multi-decade lease on DOE land where we're going to invest roughly $1.5 billion into an enrichment facility in Paducah, using our own technology and doing that on the DOE land at the former gaseous diffusion plant site, which was the last place that the U.S. enriched uranium at scale. So some context on where we sit in the supply chain. So to us, enrichment is upstream of fuel, fuel's upstream of reactors, and reactors are upstream of power production, which is today's topic. Where we sit in fuel production is right in the middle. And so you have mining, you have conversion, enrichment, deconversion, and fuel fabrication. We are the step that is a refining step, so there's no chemical reactions, no nuclear reactions, simply the separation of material to isolate the uranium that's used in reactors. And so this is an enrichment facility. We have access to some of the spent, depleted uranium that's at the Paducah site and is left over from decades of enrichment. In the event of shortages of our feedstock, we can tap into that. And so Paducah has many, many advantages for us. The first one is the community, the experience there. Sean from Founders Fund presented right before this. We are backed primarily by Founders Fund, which has a long track record that Sean mentioned. One important element of Founders Fund is that it's worked very closely with the government in the past to solve problems that were previously the domain of government, but that required a new commercial approach towards. And so that included SpaceX, Palantir, Anduril, companies that ended up employing thousands of people and restoring U.S. leadership in these areas. We've heard a little bit about this today already. but the inputs to AI, really it's algorithms, chips, and power. So you need power to run the chips. The chips run the compute algorithms. And these data centers are really just large buildings that house racks and racks of computers doing these computations. And so if you look at what's really the bottleneck to scaling, what do the AI hyperscalers have in mind when they look for sites? We've heard about it today. It's power. And so you look at these quotes from two leaders in the AI space, Sam Altman at OpenAI, Elon Musk at xAI, and both of them have identified the same thing. At the end of the day, the cost of AI is the cost of power. The ability to scale AI is just how much can you scale power. And so, as Sean alluded to, many of these data centers are now looking to nuclear. Fossil fuels are more difficult for them long term. They will do it in the short term to maintain leadership, but long term they want to find a safe, clean power source that's baseload. And so all of them are turning to nuclear. So here you see Amazon, Google, Microsoft all turning towards nuclear as their solution for powering their data centers. And so if you put this all together, you can see this chain where if you want to lead in data centers, one way to do that is to lead in nuclear energy in the state. And one thing that's upstream of nuclear energy is nuclear fuel. And that's the piece that we're working on. So obviously with our first facility being in Paducah, that plant's really an anchor tenant for this type of ecosystem. That's one end of the spectrum. You have the other end of the supply chain, if we go back, being the data centers themselves. And a week before our announcement, the DOE announced Paducah as one of 4 AI infrastructure sites. And that's because of that heritage in Paducah, where you had the former gaseous diffusion plant, you had a lot of power consumption there, you had a lot of power utility lines coming into the area, and you have multiple utilities serving that site today. Paducah was named for those reasons, and so is a great place to put data centers. You have the transmission capacity, and you have a lot of production capacity that's currently offline that could be brought back. And so right here, you really have both ends of that spectrum that could position Western Kentucky as a hub for both AI data centers and nuclear energy, and really lock up that supply chain in Kentucky. And I just touched on this, but the reasons that that site was selected include power, it includes water, community support, and then finally the financial environment for profitable operations. So happy to answer any questions. Happy to be a resource as the committee thinks through this, and happy to host any of you in Paducah, Kentucky as we build our facility. Thank you.
Anybody got any questions? You did a fantastic job.
No questions. Great.
I am really excited about what you all are getting ready to do in Paducah. From a state's perspective, is there something that you all see coming in from obviously out of state, making this huge investment in Kentucky that we need to pay attention to, that we can kind of help with? That is there any kind of anomaly that you see here that we should perhaps be focusing on?
One of our goals is to bring back production as quickly as possible. So again, U.S. no longer has the ability to do all the steps to make fuel, and in 2028 there's a ban on Russian imports that goes into full effect. So the U.S. will have a gap in its fuel supply for its reactors that power 20% of the grid. So we're trying to go as quickly as we can, and we're committed to operating before end of the decade. The 3 things that'll determine how quickly we can go are federal licensing, the availability of utilities and power to the site, and then our own construction. And so I think the only one that's really up to Kentucky and up to the local community is utilities to the site, power to the site. And so that's something where this is true of any manufacturing, AI, data center business that wants to locate in Kentucky or anywhere else. The number one thing, as we've heard today, is how quickly can you get up and running with baseload power? And so this is not unique to us. It's a common factor that's going to drive timelines of how fast the economic growth can happen. It's how quickly can we get connected to the grid? How quickly can the grid support production of electricity that these facilities need? And yeah, I think that's most likely to be the largest factor.
Co-Chair Bledsoe.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. I'm going to sound naive here when I ask this question, but since there's two plants happening at one time, the DOE project and your project, EPA has had some involvement in that space as well. How are all of you going to work together from a layman's perspective?
I would say, maybe I'll go back to one of these slides. Each of these is a distinct step, and so our facility will be on 100 acres of land at the southern end of the site. Where, if, when, and where the data centers are placed, that is a completely separate topic and decision. There could be infrastructure that we could share, so there's some potential coordination there around the grid. But beyond that, I think the two things are separate plots of land, not directly connected. If you were trying to create an entire supply chain that were connected, you would still need the reactors in the middle. And so being co-located is great from a talent and infrastructure perspective, but those two decisions can be made more or less independently of how we do that. Again, minus the infrastructure and grid piece, which should be planned out through these studies that we heard earlier.
Okay, that makes sense to me, and that's helpful. And you don't have any EPA burdens or barriers in your pathway to move forward?
Not at this point.
Okay, thank you.
There will be a set of environmental characterization. There is a NEPA process as part of our federal license. So there's still environmental work and licensing to be done, but no roadblocks right now. It's not driving schedule right now. Senator Thomas.
Senator Thomas.
Just to follow up on Senator Bledsoe's point, I asked this question earlier with regard to nuclear plant construction and location. My understanding is that your preference would be to be located more in rural areas as opposed to urban areas. I talked to, when I asked the same question of John, he indicated that the preference would be the better preference would be to locate it near urban areas, near universities, near airports. He emphasized airports. What about the location of nuclear power sites?
So, when we were looking for sites, and we looked in 11 states, 1,000 plots of land, hundreds of communities, we settled on Paducah because of its experience with nuclear, its supportive enrichment, having conducted it recently. And so whether you're in a rural community or urban community, the community support is the main thing that matters, and their understanding of what you're doing. Even with that, because we're running what's essentially a large chemical facility, it's not something that makes sense to be in a dense urban area. It makes more sense to be 10, 15, 20 minutes outside of town where it's easily commutable. It can support the workforce that may live in town or around town. And so you don't want to be too far, but you don't need to be right downtown. And so for us, this site makes a lot of sense also, being 20 minutes outside of downtown Paducah. Now for reactors, that's going to be probably a different question of where they want to be. I think if it's conventional large reactors, they'll typically want to be a little bit further outside of town. If it's the new smaller modular reactors with an even more enhanced safety profile, they are talking about being closer to populations for convenience and for deployability. But for us, we view it pretty differently than the reactor community. We're comfortable being 10, 15, 20 minutes outside of town to access that workforce and still be, a reasonable distance as you would have most chemical or industrial facilities, not in a dense urban area.
Anyone else? Senator Rawlings.
Thank you, Chairman Bray. Is this new construction, or are you incorporating any of the old facilities and buildings?
This is new construction at the southern end of the site.
So you weren't able to take advantage of anything that's already there? Not
at this time.
Is that going to be demolished?
My understanding is those existing structures are planned to be demolished. They're, they contain things like asbestos and other things that people want to, the plan is to dispose of those and return the site to a state that it can be redeveloped.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your testimony. One of the things that's kind of clear to me just looking at the opportunity in Kentucky is kind of what Mr. Bevington presented. You know, we've got all of this demand, whether it's manufacturing, data centers. We've got a lot of economic demand, but we've got to make sure that we've got the capacity to accommodate those demands, because it's not going to go away. If anything, the demand we have now is going to be minuscule to what it is 20 years from now as AI evolves and grows, and particularly as things like uranium enrichment come back onto American soil. A lot of the kind of agenda driven federally is to reshore a lot of our manufacturing, and we've got to make sure that Kentucky has the capacity to take advantage of that. So very appreciative of you all coming in and presenting today, appreciative of Mr. Bevington's presentation. With that, and seeing no one else on the agenda or wanting to speak, we will consider ourselves adjourned. Thank you all.